and there was S so and so shop branches, and ERB so and so, and street branches, number so and so.
I'd love to see that.
Well, we had about, there were about 35 or 40, you see, of these branches.
Huh, that's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
This is like you just found in your files?
Yeah.
Because that stuff would be, if you had a lot of it, it'd be worth eventually depositing in a library. If you have much.
No, well, it wouldn't mean much to the librarian. See, there's the minutes of the educational committee, for example. Call to order. Who's present? So and so from this branch, that branch, and the other branch.
Right.
And then there's the summary of the discussion. It's all in Bassett's writing.
It's funny, that sort of stuff is very valuable to historians, believe it or not.
Yeah.
If you have a batch of it, I'm sure that like the Schomburg collection would probably be very happy to get it if you have like, much of that stuff.
Oh, well, it's right there. I'll look at it and go over there. What's the curator's name?
Ernest Kaiser.
No.
And then, the other one.
The woman.
Mrs. What's her name?
I used to know her well.
No, I forgot her name, but I know
I'll
what you're talking
remember
about.
it. I'll remember it.
Right.
Because she was the, what was she now? Well, I'll say this in confidence now. But she was, I don't know whether she was a branch organizer or a membership director. She at Columbia, see. She was a member of that
Right.
Columbia branch.
Well, it sounds like the tentacles go very, very deep. You scratch a lot of people.
Yeah,
It goes back to those days.
Yeah, well, back in those days, you see, why we had everything. That whole community, we could almost look at it, lay it down, look at it in our office.
Did you ever have like branches in a particular church, or?
No. Now Powell threatened to have the branches in church. This sermon where he, once in his sermon at least, he said that they can talk about the communists all they want, but when a Soviet America comes, I want our senior church to organize the first Soviet. We tried to organize a branch. We had a number of his members.
So you had members of the party in various churches?
Who were in his church, yeah. We had members, but we never got around to organizing a branch.
What was the party's relationship to the Consolidated Tenants League, which was that big tenants organization in Harlem in that period, or is that not something that rings a bell?
Well, I think that was mainly on paper.
You mean that organization?
Yeah. It had offices there, but it was. I think it only dealt with complaints somewhat on a lawyer-client basis, you see.
So it wasn't a big mass movement?
No, but our tenants organizations dealt with, not only the tenants organizations deal with just complaints, you see. We dealt with evictions, escrow payments, things of a struggle character. And well, it remained one of the stronger organizations too.
How widely read and influential was the Daily Worker in Harlem in that period?
Well, I don't think we ever were able to get the kind of circulation in Harlem for the Daily Worker. Although it was tried, we had Red Sundays and everything, and we got not so much circulation from the point of view of subscription, but through Red Sundays we used to cover maybe 500-600 copies.
Mhm.
We would have these every Sunday, you know, mobilizations for the daily work. But it was never a success.
It never caught on as a popular community.
No.
Okay. There are a couple of people, okay, which I wanted to ask you about. Hammy Snipes, we already talked about. Harold Williams also.
Harold Williams was at one time the party organizer in Harlem.
That was in the early 30s.
In the early 30s, probably the late 20s and early 30s.
Right.
That's when that was in the formative period.
Right.
Then he became the Daily Worker circulation manager. And that's the last thing I remember about Harold. From there, he defected. Now, how he defected, why he defected, I don't quite get it. See, but I know he defected.
What happened with another person whose relation to the party, I guess, was stormy, is Richard Moore. Now, he was in Boston, I guess, from 37, and then I get the impression in 39 and 40 he's back in Harlem.
Yeah.
And then somebody told me that he left the party in like 40 or 41.
Well, on that, he was expelled from the party, see. And in that expulsion, I was the prosecutor, more or less. I think now wrongly, but as I say, at that time I was working for the party, and what he had done, what he had done was it's a problem that they're still working on. See. The problem was that we were dealing with at that time was whether or not the white labor unions would fight for the right of that's right. We were fighting for jobs, you see, for Negroes. Now, some said if you fight for jobs for Negroes, you can't stop short of a white worker being fired. Some says, no, we've got to fight for jobs for Negroes and for the white worker's job at the same time. Moore said that we're just fighting for jobs for Negroes, and we can't be responsible if a white worker is fired.
Right.
See, we're just fighting for this job right here. Well, they're still working on that now. Well, for that, which was against the line of the party had already decided that we will fight for the rights of Negroes to jobs, but we want to guarantee that white workers are not fired.
Yeah. What year was this when this?
There was about 40, I guess.
But he took that position 7 years before.
Yeah,
so it was like that he was consistent.
Yeah, he's consistent. This was his consistent approach. I grant you that his approach, by the way, was not incorrect. See, not incorrect, because at this time, this is what we are bothered with. Now, that's between the white workers and the boss, you see. Now, I could see this line being pursued, and the white worker would join in the fight for jobs this way. But the party, see, had so decided, in a sense, it was inconsistent. I became the prosecutor, and he was expelled for taking a divisive stand. See, it's a splitting stand, a stand in respect to the white workers and the Negroes.
Did he remain sort of in the family after he was
Yeah.
expelled, so that it
Yeah.
was?
Yeah, he remained in the family. I used to visit his bookstore, and because I was later, I was very remorseful.
But was it possible? Was that true of some people who were in Harlem, that even when people were expelled, sometimes they kept a relationship? Or was that unusual in his case? Because
No, that wasn't unusual. I don't think I can't. I can't remember another expulsion, but I think of people who've left, you know, but who still come around to affairs.
right. Well, there were a lot of, I guess, what you would call fellow travelers in
Yeah,
Harlem.
a lot of
People who like hung around the party but didn't
yeah.
join.
Oh, lots of them. Yeah. See, you had a lot of people like Aaron Douglas and his wife. They never joined the party, but they were always around, and there were any number of them. You see, he was a leader in the art field. His wife was a teacher, a real socialite. She was. And there may have been others, and I've met a few doctors. Most of them are out of the party now. I've met a few of them fairly recently, and they always want to know what was happening. They miss the discussions, and you know after all, the party did give them a chance, you know, to discuss politics, which was before hadn't.
No, it's, you know, my own experience. I know that even in all the craziness of the movement in the 60s, which I was involved in, I still miss it. There's a, you know, there's a vitality. It's, everything is.
You're in touch with the people who are doing something to change.
Yeah.
You see, you're in a movement, and you read about what happened over there, and this is a part of you that's happening. See, I helped to make this happen.
Yeah.
So you can't knock it.
Right. I guess it's always it's almost like somebody who's been through a war.
Mm-hmm.
When you get together with the people from the old times, there's a bond.
Yeah,
They went through the fight together.
Right.
One organization which I saw a lot about was the Domestic Workers Union. Did that have any real impact? They claimed in the Daily Workers article that this organization helped wipe out what they call the slave markets.
Well, Ford's wife, Mary, was her name Mary? I guess so. Was the organizer of the domestic workers. And this was one of the most difficult sections of the working class to get organized. So that although there was a group of domestic workers, there never was a real successful organizational drive. We had a number of them come in, a number joined the party. Some of them stayed. By the way, they stayed until 52 and 53. But the reforms that got the domestic workers somewhat liberated, they came from legislation in Albany and in Washington.
Right. I got a couple of other people who are named I sort of picked out of the hat as seemingly key people. Howard Johnson, who Stretch, who I'm in touch with and going to interview. He was the leader of the YCL for a while.
Yes, he was, yeah.
And he was a dancer at the Cotton Club at one time, or?
Well, I know he was a dancer, yeah. He was a dancer. that, well, let's see, I think my brothers were dancers that, see. And he knew them, and the Nicholas brothers. Now, well, you're going to interview him.
Right, so yeah.
So
Helen Holman, is that?
Helen Holman. Gee, now, you know, that's a name, I've always had a face there, and I couldn't remember what that name was.
Something associated with the Women's Commission and in the various peace movements.
Helen Holman was a woman who had married in her young days, and during the 20s, she had married this white socialist. They had drifted away from all socialist activity. Then in the 30s, 35, 36, somewhere in there, he died. And then she was left without anything. See, you know, they didn't have each other. And then she came back. She's finding her way in the communist movement, because this was the inheritor of our socialism. And I remember her just as from that, you know, from conversations with her, and she had a hard time finding a place. You see, because after you've been isolated for 20 years and come back, things change. And everything is different from what she had experienced, you know, as a young girl. And, well, that's all. I can't say anything else. Everything else about her, you'll have to get from her.
Well, Phil Arundel, was he a youth leader?
Oh, yeah, he was a youth leader, Phil Arundel. So you're throwing names at me that I've forgotten, and I can't recall. Yeah, Phil Arundel was a youth leader there. I can't remember very much about him, since the youth was completely separate.
Yeah. What about Louis Burnham? Was he a native Harlemite, or somebody came in from outside?
No, he's a native Harlemite, City University graduate. He I know well. We worked very closely together. A very brilliant fellow, an administrator.
So he was one of the more capable people who came in to the organization.
He was an organizer with Jackson. What was his name? Well, maybe you got his name down there.
James Jackson?
No, not James Jackson. No. Well, anyway, I'll think of it.
Not Manning Johnson?
No. This Jackson was a theology student at Howard. Also a very brilliant kid. But Burnham became an organizer for the National Negro Congress. Then out of the National Negro Congress, he became the first organizer of the Southern Youth Congress.
Right.
And then they moved from Richmond to Buffalo. From Richmond to Birmingham. And then finally the organization founded, and he came back and what was he doing? He came back and worked for the Guardian, I think.
Okay, was Angelo Herndon active in Harlem?
Yeah, he was there, you know, he wasn't active. He came there, he was writing his autobiography, and then he helped organize a publishing company. They published one thing. They published, I think they published two books, The Kidnap and the Ransom, and the autobiography of Frederick Douglass.
Right. What about Eugene Gordon? He was a writer for the Daily Worker, and
Eugene Gordon. Well, Eugene Gordon, you know, where I first ran into him was a long time ago in the American Mercury. That was one of my favorites. That Mencken's.
Right, yeah. And he used to write for that.
Well, he used to write for. He was one of Mencken's boys. He used to write for Mencken, and that was my first god. And he worked for the Daily. That's all I can say.
And let's see, Max Jurgen, who was
Max Jurgen
was, I guess, a leader of the National Negro Congress, and then eventually turned informer.
Yeah, but Max Jurgen came from South Africa. See, he came from South Africa. He was so mad with them. I imagine Ford and I, we met with him, and he's telling us all of the, the indignities he had to suffer in South Africa, and how he was a Y man in South Africa, and how he couldn't teach the kids what he wanted to teach them, and he wanted to put himself at the disposal of the party. Gee, look at the big fish we got. We took him down to Browder's, and we talked with, Browder. We had a long talk at that. He finally became, he would become anything we had said then. He took over the Negro Congress, and he was one of the guys. He was a real aristocrat, absolute, everything formal. When he had, the maid, and his dinner was served at a certain time.
Right.
And he had a couple of sons, I think. I believe he's had a couple of sons. And they're doctors now. And where he got off the ball in 40, was it 46?
I'm not sure.
No, it was right after 46. Right after, during the rise, right after 47, when the McCarthy Committee began. When right after Truman had intervened in Greece, and in the Fulton speech, and then starts the red baiting. He married a fairly well-to-do psychiatrist who lived in Croton on Hudson. Lena somebody was her name, I forgot her name. And then he blasted the party and joined up with the pro-South. What is that, water?
No, just maybe wind.
Oh. Then he joined the pro-South Africa group.
Amazing.
He and Scott were the Negroes on the group.
Right. What about Calvin Krim? Does that name ring a bell?
Yeah. Well, I remember Calvin Krim well. Calvin Krim was a street speaker. He was a superb. He wasn't just a street speaker. He was a superb street speaker. We would all go and listen to him speak. You see, he had been a nationalist, and all of a sudden he determined, for something reason or other, I don't know, that he liked the communists better. So he came in and joined up with us. We discovered nothing wrong with him, with his ideology, but he had some difficulty with his wife, and I don't know, he wasn't able to patch this up. It seems that he must have loved this woman. I never saw her. But he was always talking about her, see. Now this guy was he was a strange combination. A poet, a very sensitive person, and a street speaker, just wonderful. You know, just a pleasure to listen to him. One day he just got off of his rocket, and he landed up out in one of these mental hospitals, and we'd go out to see him. And I thought maybe he'll get better, but he never did. I said he just died in that mental hospital.
How important was the American Labor Party in the CP activities in that period?
Very important.
That was the focal point of the electoral?
Always. Every election, see, the party had a special Marcantonio. Well, mainly the American Labor Party was mainly the Marcantonio, see. But for different reasons. For different reasons also. The American Labor Party, when it first organized, that was our expression of the People's Front. Until the Liberal Party.
Right, I guess that was after the Nazi-Soviet pact. Right. What happened with Randolph after the Nazi-Soviet pact? Did you know, like, that at that Negro Congress, what was going to happen? That Randolph was going to?
No, we were all taken by surprise.
That was a surprise.
Yeah, we were all taken by surprise. We didn't know.
That Randolph, in other words, had been friendly up to that point?
Right up to the very day. And then he delivered his blast, that speech. Well, we were so surprised until immediately we had to call the meeting at the highest level. We got no sleep that night.
You mean you called the Politburo meeting, you think? Or?
Well, there was of all the people who were there.
Right.
See, we called that, and we all stayed up all night long. After that, we detailed each one. You do this and do that. We had to get a speech. There's John Davis, I think, in his speech, he had to answer Randolph. Man, well, he did. I still have that speech. The proceedings.
Right. Did that really hurt the Congress, that particular division?
Yeah, naturally. Yeah.
And after that, Randolph and the party were always pretty hostile.
Yeah, now that's when Max came in. Max Jurgen.
Right.
Came in right there. We had to pack, this whole thing had to be packed up at the last minute.
Okay. What? I noticed that, like, shortly after Savory and Powell took over the Amsterdam News, they started firing the people in the guild, like Poston and Moon and Otley and those people. Was that a big issue, or?
Well, I don't. It doesn't seem to have been such a no. Because I remember the reason why. Because I remember that Savory was one of the leaders in the Ethiopia. And I used to confer with Savory all the time.
Right. So that was even up through the late 30s.
No, because we still had our unit in there. You see, we had the Amsterdam News unit.
There's an Amsterdam News Party unit.
But these people were not members of it. See, Poston wasn't a member. Moon wasn't a member. These were all anti-communists. Otley wasn't a member, although he'd come around once in a while. He'd come around to office once in a while. And who else was the flyer? You see, there was Chase and Bill Chase, the cartoonist. Ollie Harrington, Marvel Cook, the woman who did the children's stories, and
They were all in the party unit?
yeah, well, we had we had the whole.
Marvel Cook was like the society columnist?
Mm-hmm.
That's funny. Well, I guess that's pretty impressive when you have the society columnist in the local paper. If you have the sports page also, you're really in good shape. You probably did.
Well, I don't know.
The sports guy.
Yeah, well, there was some guys who were staunch anti-communists, and they were
Was, by the time of, let's say, 39, were there a lot of, like, strong anti-communists in Harlem?
well, they were in various spots, you see, but they couldn't say very much. You see, there was a guy named Baker. I see him surface once in a while now. Well, he was one of these